Hi, I'm here with Chris White. Chris, you're running for County Commission Seat 8 against Zachary Renstrom. We want to talk to you about Lake Powell Pipeline. We feel like it's the most important issue probably facing the county as far as just kind of the potential impact implications. On one hand, people are saying that it's a very expensive project and could go many times over the near $1 billion it's projected. And on the other hand, there's a lot of worries about the future of water availability in Washington County. So it seems to us, any way you kind of slice it up, the implications could be huge as to how what the county and actually the region decides to do on this issue. So we want to really focus on that today. But before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, your background?
Okay. So 2 years ago I actually ran for this office also, and I had been approached by the Democratic Party, asked to run, and I liked the opportunity to get out and talk to the people about the different issues, like for instance Lake Powell Pipeline. And so I accepted the invitation and I ran. This time around I committed to running twice because as a Democrat in Southern Utah the odds are against you and you put a lot of time and money into running, so I wanted to make sure I took advantage of all the support I'd been given and the knowledge that I had. And I ran a second time. So that was always the plan, to run a second time. I love Washington County. I've been here about 10 years. My family's here. I moved here from Las Vegas, which also deals a lot with the water issues, being in a desert. And as a matter of fact, they've gone through their pipeline battles there. But in about 10 years, I got my wife, and I just had my 5th child. So I expect to be here for a long time. And I have many kids that will be needing the water in the future. So, which is what you talk about a lot when you talk about the Lake Powell Pipeline is, will there be water in the future? Can I just throw out, like, just to get started, and I'll base our whole conversation on this, let me throw out an analogy that I like to use with people. When you talk about the Lake Powell Pipeline, let's talk for a minute about a couple that got married, right? And let's say that the wife comes from a very wealthy background, where she's always been able to spend money, have nice things. And this couple gets married, and the husbands, they're starting out, and like every young couple, they're not making as much as, of course, let's say her father was making. And in that relationship, there's going to come a point where they're going to have a conversation, and the husband's going to have to say, look, either we cut back on our spending because I can't afford your habits, right? Or he's going to have to say, honey, you just keep spending and live the lifestyle you're accustomed to, and I'll just figure out a way to make money. I'll just keep making more money. You just spend away, and I'll keep making more money, right? So I like that analogy because I think that actually happens a lot in marriages. I think every marriage is accustomed to that discussion of, either we're going to have to make more money and do whatever it takes to make that money, or we're going to have to change our lifestyle. Okay, so I think that's the Lake Powell Pipeline. The idea that we as citizens are that wife, and we live in a desert, and we use water like crazy, right? And let's say Ron Thompson's that husband, and Ron Thompson is doing everything he can to keep our lifestyle going. And he keeps saying, I'm going to keep finding ways to get water, and he's done an amazing job. We have some projects that he's done that are just incredible. Well, we're spending more than what we're making, so now he's saying, all right, I'm going to go out and get this other source. And the real question on the Lake Powell Pipeline comes down to this. Just like in that marriage, it's not healthy to not change the way that they live. Washington County has to learn to change the way that we live. We're going to have to start living within our means. So I give you that analogy because I think most of the questions or the things that we talk about here will fit into that analogy of the way that Chris White thinks.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy. Now, I think that analogy kind of encompasses some of the different aspects of the question, and they're related, but I think they're in a way separate. So, one is how much the project's going to cost. That's one, and there's a lot of, I guess, debate in that arena. The other question is, do we need the water? You know what I mean? Do we need it? Are there enough sources here locally that we could do without it? And then I think the third question that's being asked is the water going to be there if we build it and we need it? Is the water going to be in the lake? So I think that probably the first question is the one that I hear discussed the most, and that's about the cost. Now, the water district, says close to $1 billion is what they're estimating right now, although they'll say that that's still, they have to do their environmental studies, and it's a preliminary estimate.
Yep.
Folks like Citizens for Dixie's Future, Paul Van Dam, who's also running for county commission, says that the cost may be many times that $5 or $6 billion or even more is what some of their estimates are. What do you think? Have you looked into kind of what they're basing these cost estimates on? Some of the other projects that have been done that might be comparable, and what do you think about I guess the idea that it would be close to $1 billion is what the Conservancy thinks?
Right. I think everyone's pretty confident that that's the low number. Mm-hmm. But I have looked at other projects, similar layouts, different things done, and I feel like that is definitely the low side. But I think it's important to point out that we just don't know yet. Mm-hmm. We just don't. That's one of the hardest parts about this whole thing is we argue of whether it's going to cost too much, and we just don't have any idea what it's going to cost. I think that it's going to cost more. I don't know if it's going to be as high as $5 billion, some of the estimates out there, but I definitely think it's going to be more than the $1 billion.
Why do you think that?
Because as I ran for office last time, I spent a lot of time going to other projects or to classes on the Lake Powell Pipeline, both put on by the Water Conservancy District and those who are against it, you could say. And I found that both sides were arguing on it, so then I started to look into some of the projects that they've done in Nevada and other ways. I mean, we've had projects here in the state of Utah that went way over budget, and it just seems like it always goes over budget. That's just the reality of politics, that's the reality of life. And similar type projects have cost more than what we're estimating this to. And we're still at the beginning stages, and it's going to be a while till we do it, and cost is going to go up. So I don't know if that's really the argument anymore. I would argue that it's more of we need to recognize that it's going to cost more, and we need to decide if we're willing to pay that or not. And that's why I use that analogy of the couple. We need to accept the fact that no matter what the cost is, it's going to raise our taxes. It's going to affect Washington County substantially.
The Conservancy, they compared this proposed project to, I think it's a 1983 project for the Quail Lake Reserve, and that project, they say, when you look at the taxable income base in the county, which I don't have the figures in front of me, but when you look at the percentage of the size and scope of that project and compare it to the taxable income in the county, which is essentially how much I guess the size of the amount that they could tax or the amount of money they could draw from, they say that project is actually much more expensive relative to the wealth that the community has, versus this project, which they say we have 50 years to pay it off. That the community will grow even more, reducing that ratio of the project cost versus the tax base. So what do you say to that? I mean, when they say that, it makes it sound like, well, this sounds like it's something we could definitely afford.
Yeah. So it's not gonna. And that's the hard part about this. I think that you have two sides, and both are trying to sway you to what they believe without giving out all the information. That's my concern. Okay. I can tell you that builders. I sell real estate. I have a client that just purchased a lot, and they were required to pay $7,500 to the Water Conservancy District. They paid $60,000 for the lot, and they have to pay $7,500 connection fee.
Is that the impact fees?
Impact fees, yeah.
Does that all go to the Water District, or is it split up somewhat?
It's split up somewhat, broken down, but if you talk to the builders, that's gone up a lot. I also can tell you that half of the water that we use, or half of the cost of the water that we used, is paid for by taxes. Meaning that, you know, we don't pay it when we pay our bills. We're taxed.
Property taxes?
Property taxes, yeah. And it goes towards that water. So my concern is that when they throw out the numbers like Quell, and Quell is a completely different project. Its use, what it does, is completely different. And it is a different price tag, but I don't know that you can compare the two. They both are important to supply us with water, but they're just completely different. One's a reservoir. One's also taking the water that we have in our immediate vicinity and storing it and treating it. So I wouldn't compare the two. I get what they're saying. I get what they're trying to say. They're trying to make us feel as if it's not going to be an overwhelming cost. And just like our property taxes right now aren't overwhelming, that they won't be in the future. I just don't think that's genuine. I think that I think it's healthier for us to accept the fact that there's going to be cost to it. And I think the citizens of Washington County need to take ownership over it, and they need to recognize that we do need water, and if we're willing to pay the price, then we'll pay the price. But yeah, to answer your question though, I don't think I think it's apples and oranges. Lake Powell Pipeline versus Quell.
Okay.
So,
do you feel like there's water in Washington County available? Do you think that there's alternatives to building this pipeline and still having the kind of growth that's projected? Not even through people coming to town, but just through, you know, people's families growing up and things like that.
So I do not think there's enough water if we continue to live our lifestyle that we're living now.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that's a big part of it, right? So we live in the desert, we consume more than other areas. That's just the reality. And there's certain reasons why, right? Because we have to, yeah, my dad's from Alabama, and in Alabama you don't have sprinklers because it rains and the grass grows. So we live in a desert and we like grass, so we have to feed it with water. So there's reasons why we consume a lot of water. But the reality is, unless we change our lifestyle, going back to that analogy earlier, we can't live off of the amount of water we have. We do have a lot of water in aquifers. Interesting thing I learned a couple of years ago is anywhere you see red, there's an aquifer below, because it traps that water because of the type of dirt. So we have a lot of underground water. We have water coming in, but that's the conversation no one wants to have. If we were to live without bringing more water in, we would definitely have to change our lifestyle. Now, that's not to say that we have to tear out all the grass and you know, have cactus in everyone's front yards. That's not what I'm suggesting. But we will have to change the way that we build, the type of building we do. We're going to have to maybe shrink the size of front yards, change the way that we irrigate, some other things like that. But I think that's the better approach. I think that, because even if you bring in the Lake Powell Pipeline, let's say it this way, even if you bring in the Lake Powell Pipeline and you pay that money, there's always going to be the next Lake Powell Pipeline, right? You're always going to have more water. If you're going to, just like I'm sure that when they talked about Quell and Sand Hollow, they talked about how this would get them into the future. The reality is there's always going to be the next, unless we start to change the way we live and use and build and think. So, and that's what I get frustrated with. It doesn't get talked about a lot. If you talk about conservation, one side will say, well, they want you to tear out your yards. And then the other side will say, no, it's not going to be that much. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It's going to take people making changes, but at the same time we can enjoy some of the things that we're accustomed to now.
Have you looked at how other desert communities that maybe are better at keeping the water consumption per capita down than Southern Utah? Have you looked at some of the things that they do and have, I guess, gotten ideas from that, you know, as to what we could do here to kind of meet that goal?
So I have looked. Now I will give a disclaimer. I believe that as a county commissioner, and I think any leadership role, it's not my job to be the expert on everything. So I mean, I haven't got lost in the studies. I've looked at other areas, and Arizona. Actually, Paul will talk a lot about some areas in Arizona. Paul has gotten lost in this topic, by the way. He's very much the expert on it, and I don't claim to be, but they've done different things.
You mean Paul Van Dam?
Paul Van Dam,
running for the
Paul Van
commission
Dam
as
was
well.
running for the other seat, that I believe you've interviewed also. So yeah, I've looked at different areas. There's been places where they've taken the approach to be more extreme. I came from Las Vegas, and when I left Las Vegas 10 years ago, they were already giving incentives for people who wanted to go desert landscape versus grass. So they had a few things going there. And no one was obligated. In fact, they gave a tax credit for anyone who wanted to take out their yard and put in desert landscapes. So there's a lot of intelligent ways to go about that change.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, and there's case studies. There's all sorts of different areas that have had to address this exact same problem. So we're not coming into something that hasn't been seen before. So
another area of concern, Chris, is if the pipeline is built. You know, now Utah does have significant water rights on the Colorado River. But my understanding is some people are concerned that because there's prior rights to other states like California that have very large water demands. So I guess there's a concern that we could build the pipeline, but we might not. That it might, the kind of aerial drought that we've been experiencing in the Southwest or across the West could get so bad that there's not enough water for Utah to draw. That our water rights are we're not going to be able to make a claim on them. Do you think that that's what do you think of that? I mean, is that something that you're worried about in terms of the pipeline, or do you think that's a realistic?
So I think that we should be worried about that. So that's a perfect example of the Lake Powell Pipeline debate. So you have one side saying that we have to put in this pipeline because possession is 9/10 of the law, right? The gentleman that I'm running against will say that. He said it a few times. Possession is 9/10 of the law. So basically we got to put a pipe in there so that we can stake a claim on that water. That's one argument, right? And then there's the others that say, well, you can put a pipe in there, but look at the population of California and those who are downstream who've been using it for a longer amount of time. Do you think that the law is going to take that water away from them and give it to you because you brought in a pipe? Right? Does that make sense? Both sides have a good argument. But when it comes to that kind of stuff, we just don't know. I don't know which way it would go. I don't know if by putting in the pipeline now that guarantees us that water. You can argue that, but you can also argue the other side, which you suggested is California, all the way down into Mexico, by the way, they have a need for that water, and they've been drawing on it for a long time. Will they have the right to take that water? You mentioned water shares before. It used to be in Washington County that all water was owned, right? Well, not owned. You don't own water. The state owns water, right? In Utah, the state owns water. You own the right to take some of that water. There used to be water shares. And we used to talk about projects. If you read up on the history, it talks about the shareholders of the water and how they had a say and they put it up to vote and stuff. I'm kind of hoping that we can create this mentality in Washington County where the citizens consider themselves shareholders. And they start to ask the question that you just asked, and then maybe they study up on it a little bit. Unfortunately, I think as they study up on it, they realize that this is a very complicated issue, right? It is. Do we spend $1 billion, $2 billion to put a placeholder in of the Lake Powell Pipeline so that in the future, when it goes to a court of law, we have, the argument that we have 9/10, knowing that that argument might not win. So, but there is no answer, in my opinion. I don't think there is an exact answer. I don't think you can point to case law or anything that says this is what will happen. I think both sides are right in a sense. They both have legitimate arguments. But that's what the Lake Powell Pipeline is. I mean, it's intelligent people arguing two sides of the same coin, I guess.
Now this issue wouldn't come up though unless there were a shortage of water to where there wasn't enough water coming from Lake Powell, you know, year over year to meet the demands of, which are going to grow over time, undoubtedly, you know, as the
we're not the only community
populations grow.
Right. Well, we're not the only community that's going to grow. Right. So the other ones are going to grow, but those are those unknowns. So this whole argument teeters around this. We don't know how much water is going to be in the upper and lower basins. We don't know. You know, we don't know what our population's going to be. In a sense, it's all a gamble. But that's why it's so important for me that we allow the citizens to make that gamble, because we're the ones that'll be paying for it. So I've always said that I believe in a referendum, or the chance for Washington County citizens to vote on the Lake Powell Pipeline, because it'll give them ownership over it, right? Just like in that marriage analogy I talked about earlier, we have to recognize that there's only so much that we have, so much money, so much water, and we have to begin to take ownership over that. And as long as ignorance on the topic is the norm, then I don't think we'll ever fix the problem, no matter how much water you throw at it, no matter how much money, taxes, or anything. So I think that education, that citizen involvement are really the fix for our water problems in Washington County, whether it comes through the Lake Powell Pipeline or conservation or any of those other topics. That's the only way you're really going to fix this. Okay. This very serious issue that we have.
So we talked about three of the kind of issues that surround this debate, I think. But I think that there's a fourth one, but it's more general, and it has to do with growth in Washington County. Sometimes when I hear the discussion about the pipeline, they start talking about projected population numbers, and then you hear, I think that we're about 150,000, somewhere around there now. You start hearing numbers that are like 600,000, 500, 600,000 people in the area. Okay, I guess there's two questions. Do you think that's a realistic? Do you think it's realistic to see 600,000 people living in the Virgin River Valley? Do you think that that's too many people? I think a lot of people might think that's too many people. First of all, and I guess the second part of that question then would be, do you think that that's what the community wants to see? Is that your sense of what the community at large? Do you think that they want to see a population of that size in the Virgin River Valley? Or do you think that people kind of generally like southern Utah the way it is, more or less right now? And it's a tough question, because I think population growth is inevitable, right? When you have, I think right now we have, what, 25% of the population is above the age, or below the age of 18, so,
Right, and we'll continue to have growth. So if we continue on as we are now, right, we will see growth. How much, no one knows. However, we have an economy that is based on construction and growth. So everything we do has to push us towards growth. That's just the reality of it. We saw in 2005, 2006 what happens if we don't have construction here, and our economy struggled. So until we can kind of diversify our economy and change certain things, we have to have that growth. And in a weird way, if we don't have those 600,000 people projected under our current economic game plan, I guess, it'll hurt us financially. So my suggestion is we change that. In 2007, there was a program put on called Vision Dixie. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. And what it was is it proposed different plans of growth. And the citizens that came out and got involved, up to like 7,000 people were involved. They said that, look, what we want to see in Washington County is to keep these same beautiful views, to keep this lifestyle that we have right now, that we've been able to keep at 150,000, and grow in a managed, planned out way, right? So instead of just building houses all over the place, we'll consider more density in certain areas, but also making sure that we don't build to a certain height where it takes away the view of the bluffs. And it's a very organized plan, but it's not I shouldn't say plan, it's a very organized proposal for the future. And what it does is invites the different cities to do that. I believe that if we truly began to follow Vision Dixie, that our growth will change the way Washington County grows right now. I believe that it'll invite a little bit more diversity, a different lifestyle. It'll allow for growth, but that isn't centered just on the construction industry. The construction industry will still be healthy and vibrant, in my opinion, but it'll change Washington County in the way that it's growing, which people say, I don't like to change, I don't want change, but in a way that it'll protect all that is beautiful in Washington County. It'll protect the nature, the beautiful views. It'll also help us to not waste our natural resources that we're wasting now. It'll also invite, like when you create higher density areas, it allows people with many kids to afford a home that can fit their family. And instead of having to have a big yard to play in, maybe there's a community park nearby, so you can fit more people in a smart area, still not take away from the natural resources, and instead of watering 36 yards, you water one park. Does that make sense? So it's a different way to plan. And
doesn't more density though just come with an inherent lifestyle change? I mean, you're going from rural to suburban to urban, I think, when we start talking about some of these higher densities, apartments as opposed to yards and houses, those sorts of things.
Yes, there will be that change, but that's that different mentality. And I still think that we'll have the growth. To answer the original question, I think that we'll have the growth, but we can actually fit that growth and we can keep it. If you were to have 600,000 people building the way that we build now, what is Washington County going to look like? Does that make sense? If everyone has a half acre or a quarter acre and you're fitting 600,000 people, it's just going to be like when you drive into Vegas, it's just covered. One of the beautiful things about Washington County is we have the bluffs where everyone's kind of hidden, and it has that small town feel, although we're still pretty big. That we're going to run out of land. I mean, that's just reality. You only have so much area. You're landlocked. And so I think if we began to change the way we look at it and accept that, it may have that urban feel, right? But what you're doing is you're changing the way you build to protect those other areas of Washington County. So, but yeah, it's just like the Lake Powell Pipeline conversation. Will we have to change the way that we build? Yeah, we are, but we're willing to do that because we're protecting our future and what we have. Okay. So I don't know if that answers your question on the urban, but you're right. Yeah, Vision Dixie talks about building in and having shopping centers near the homes, and it'll cut down on the need for car travel and then mass transit throughout. So, but by so doing, you'll protect the bluffs, because in St. George, everyone looks to where the airport mountain there, where it was cut into for construction, and that's an indicator of the kind of things that are going to happen when you start to run out of land. People are going to get creative, and they're going to build houses where I think most people don't want them to be built.
Is there anything else that you want to add on the Lake Powell, something you want to share with the voters?
I don't. I encourage everyone to find as much information as they can, but probably what I would encourage them most to do is demand that information from the Water Conservancy District, and then demand it from their local leaders, because if the leaders, the elected officials, began to demand the information and demand that their citizens become more aware and more invited into the discussion, then what's going to happen is those that are going to make the decisions are going to have to be more thorough. It's going to open up the processes. It's going to require that they really get us involved. And I think that we need to have this shareholder mentality where we understand that we're paying for that water through taxes and cost, and so we do have ownership over it. We don't have legal ownership over it, but we have ownership over it, and we have ownership over the cost of it, and then we have ownership over the actual use of it and how we use it. So get involved, and then demand that their leaders demand more information.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you.